the European Union (EU) has recently renewed its sanctions on Russia while also adopting a more unified approach in its dealings with the United States, particularly under President Donald Trump's administration. At a foreign ministers' meeting held on January 27, 2025, the EU agreed to continue sanctions aimed at restricting trade with Russia and freezing billions in sovereign assets, a measure intended to pressure Moscow in its ongoing war with Ukraine. The sanctions, which are renewed every 6 months, are seen as crucial to depriving Russia of the revenue it needs to fund its military operations. In addition to their focus on Russia, EU leaders have emphasized the importance of unity within Europe in dealing with Trump's transactional foreign policy. Kaja Kallas, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, stressed that Europe must close ranks to remain stronger in the face of Trump's unpredictable approach to international relations. She called for European solidarity in response to Trump's policy, which analysts have described as a divide-and-rule strategy, aimed at weakening the EU by fostering bilateral relationships with individual member states. Zuzana Vey, a program officer at the German Marshall Fund, pointed out that Trump's approach could have a destabilizing effect on the EU, as European leaders compete for his attention, particularly those in countries with Eurosceptic tendencies. This could further undermine the unity of the European bloc, especially if Trump's support for far-right European parties continues. While Trump's policy toward Russia remains somewhat uncertain, there is cautious optimism in Europe about his recent statements against Moscow. During a press briefing, Trump warned that if Russia did not end its war in Ukraine, it would face further sanctions and higher tariffs. This statement was welcomed by EU diplomats, who appreciated the pressure Trump was placing on Russian President Vladimir Putin. However, some leaders, particularly Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, were initially hesitant to endorse the renewal of EU sanctions on Russia. Orbán had stalled the process, demanding that Ukraine reopen gas pipelines to Hungary in exchange for his support, but eventually relented after Trump's stern stance on Russia took him by surprise. The EU's renewal of sanctions against Russia comes at a time when tensions over energy supplies and the ongoing war in Ukraine remain critical. While Hungary continues to navigate its complex relationship with both Moscow and Washington, other EU nations are focused on maintaining a unified front, particularly in the face of Trump's shifting foreign policy. In addition to the Russia sanctions, the EU is also evaluating the situation in Syria, where the bloc has agreed on a roadmap for the potential easing of sanctions. This will depend on Syria's commitment to forming an inclusive government and respecting human rights. Despite the desire for some relief, EU officials have acknowledged the risks of a destabilized Syria, with the dire economic situation in the country presenting a significant challenge to any transition. As the EU faces mounting pressure on multiple fronts, from Russia to Syria and the shifting priorities of the US under Trump, it is clear that European leaders will need to remain united and strategic in their responses to global crises. The ongoing geopolitical uncertainty highlights the delicate balancing act that the EU must perform to preserve its unity and influence in a rapidly changing world.